Teachers of Reddit, what is the scariest thing you have ever seen a student do? There was a student in our school who developed a dangerously unhealthy obsession with one of my colleagues. This young individual was emotionally unstable, having threatened to commit suicide on multiple occasions. As time passed, the student became convinced that he was in a romantic relationship with the other teacher, believing that this imagined connection was his sole reason for living. The student's behavior grew increasingly alarming, as he would often attempt to corner the teacher in an effort to get them alone. He would openly discuss his supposed relationship with other students and frequently attempted to gain their sympathy. His fixation escalated to the point where he even followed the teacher home and sat outside their apartment, watching and waiting. As I became more aware of the severity of the student's infatuation, I grew increasingly concerned for both the student and my colleague. I decided to have a private conversation with the teacher and reported my concerns to the school administration. We discussed potential ways to address the situation, but my colleague was hesitant to take any action, fearing that he might lose his job. Living in the South, where being openly gay could be a source of prejudice, he felt particularly vulnerable and unsure of how to handle the situation. Despite his initial reluctance, the administration and guidance counselor confronted the student about his behavior. This proved to be a catalyst for even more extreme actions, as the student became enraged and agitated. He adamantly insisted that he was in a genuine relationship with the teacher and became determined to identify the person who had reported him. He began trying to corner other staff members, questioning them aggressively in an attempt to extract information. The situation continued to escalate, resulting in the police being called to escort the student off campus on multiple occasions. The school was on high alert, with staff members and students alike growing increasingly fearful of the student's unpredictable behavior. In the aftermath of these incidents, the teacher was placed on leave. Feeling overwhelmed and unsafe, he ultimately decided to resign from his position and move to another state in search of a fresh start. Unfortunately, the student eventually discovered that I had been the one to report the situation to the administration. As a result, he redirected his fixation and began to target me. He followed me around, persistently interrupting my classes even though I was not his teacher, and demanded to know the teacher's new address. He threatened me both verbally and through written notes, creating an atmosphere of fear and tension in the school. For my safety, I had to be escorted to my car at the end of the school day on several occasions. Other teachers also started taking precautions, avoiding being alone in their classrooms and remaining vigilant about their surroundings. The entire school community was deeply affected by the student's behavior. At one point, he stood outside the school for hours in front of the flagpole, sobbing uncontrollably and drawing the attention of passers-by. I was gravely concerned that he would harm himself or someone else, and I made repeated appeals to everyone involved to get him the help he so desperately needed. Regrettably, the student's mother refused to acknowledge that there was a problem. She was dismissive of the idea that her son was in need of counseling or a psychological evaluation, insisting that the school was exaggerating the issue. She even threatened to sue the school if they contacted her again with what she perceived as fabricated stories about her child. In a final effort to protect the students and staff, the school implemented additional security measures, including surveillance cameras and restricted access to certain areas. Counseling services were also made available to those affected by the situation. The ordeal was a chaotic and distressing experience for everyone involved. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing mental health concerns and fostering a supportive environment within educational institutions. I had a student who was killing and dissecting cats, dogs, and hamsters, made a few attempts at killing a sweet younger sibling, and got into fights all the time. He would say the most awful things in class, like when asked what he wanted to do for vacation, mentioned luring a kid into the woods, getting him lost, so he'd die in the forest. He was gleeful about it, like he genuinely thought this would be fun. He left my grade, and then I had one of the younger siblings, who was always coming in exhausted and scarred, bruised, etc., because his sibling would hurt him. We were told the most awful stories, throwing bunnies in a pillowcase and hitting the wall until the pillowcase was red, pulling whiskers off a cat and then suffocating it, drowning a neighbor's puppy in oil, just horrible stuff. His mom would stay after hours just sobbing, talking about the ways she'd tried to get him help, and how there just weren't resources available. Insurance. The state wouldn't sign off on sending him to a treatment facility because he had not succeeded in permanently maiming or killing anyone. Yet. We reported it, but we kept hitting the same wall. The parents took every sharp thing, every weapon, out of their house. They were hyper-vigilant because if he got so much as a pin, he'd use it on someone or some animal. They tried a short-term hold, but it made things worse. He just learned tricks to hurt and get things that he wouldn't have otherwise. His dad worked out of town to try and afford therapy and interventions, so was gone a lot. So a lot of the kid's rage at being controlled fell on the mom's siblings, which is likely why one day he managed to get a hold of a gun from a relative's house, and then hide it, and wait for his mom's siblings to pull into the garage. He then killed them, and tried to blame an intruder, but the evidence was pretty clear-cut that he'd done it. The way I heard it, the first thing, before the police had put it together yet, that the dad said when he got a call from the cops was to ask if his son had killed his family. He just knew. And yeah, he was right. The dad and mom both worked so hard to try and find some resource, some help, and there just wasn't any, anywhere along the way. It was such a chilling domino of failures to watch happen in real time, and so completely heartbreaking. They were good parents. They did everything they possibly could have done. Everyone knew it was just a matter of time, with him. I'm not a teacher, but this story will definitely get you. There was a young boy, about 4 or 5 years old, in the class that my mother taught. As her assistant, I often helped her with various tasks in the classroom. One particular child in the class had a habit of crying incessantly, and it seemed that nothing we did could console him. As a result, I would frequently sit down with him and engage in various activities, such as coloring, chatting, or just spending time with him, in an effort to make him feel better. The boy had a recurring theme in his drawings, which often depicted himself in tears and in the presence of a frightening monster. He confided in me that nobody believed him when he said the monster was evil. Trying to comfort him, I explained that everyone encounters monsters at some point in their lives, but it is crucial to face them bravely, as confronting them can sometimes make them disappear. Eventually, I decided to inform his mother about the monster he kept mentioning. She seemed puzzled, unsure of what the monster could represent. As the story unfolded, it became apparent that the monster was not a figment of the boy's imagination, but rather a cruel reality. The monster turned out to be his own father, who had been subjecting him to inappropriate abuse on a daily basis. The unbearable pain he experienced at home was the reason for his constant tears. One fateful day, the boy's mother unexpectedly returned home from work early and caught the father in the act. In a fit of rage, she attempted to shoot him. Although she did not succeed, the father was eventually arrested and jailed for his despicable actions. The mother informed me that she had enrolled her son in therapy to help him heal from the trauma he had endured. I have not seen the boy since that time, but the experience has left an indelible mark on my memory. Initially, I had assumed that the monster he spoke of was a mere figment of his imagination, a make-believe creature that haunted his thoughts. However, the chilling truth was that the monster was real, and it was living under the same roof as the innocent child. He didn't really do anything that frightening while he was with me, but he certainly managed to scare me after he was gone. I had recently taken over as the class teacher for a group of 39th grade students in the middle of the school year. One of my first tasks was to inform a particular student that he was being expelled due to his lack of attendance. He had only shown up to class 3 times in 6 months. Before breaking the news to him, we had a pleasant conversation, during which I mentioned that, as a newcomer to the class, I felt I might be missing some important context. Despite this, I couldn't help but feel bad, as he didn't strike me as the type of person who would skip school simply because he didn't want to get out of bed. Throughout our discussion, the student remained polite and courteous. He thanked me for my gentle approach, shook my hand, and then, to my astonishment, abruptly punched another student in the face, breaking his nose. He quickly fled the room and sprayed pepper spray near the door to deter any pursuit. Needless to say, the situation was incredibly awkward. A few days later, when I finally had some free time, I decided to go through the administrative files of my new students to learn more about them. This particular student's file was filled with drawings. It seemed he had a penchant for sketching while in class, back when he still attended regularly. His drawings predominantly featured AK-47s. He was born in Russia, and we were in Western Europe at the time. The illustrations were accompanied by love poems dedicated to the AK-47, written in Russian, as well as various scenes depicting the weapon in action and lists of fellow students. My predecessors had confiscated these drawings, along with the hit lists, and filed them away in a folder that most people wouldn't even bother to look at, as it typically contained documentation of things that were already known to the teacher. However, no one had informed me that there might be a serious issue lurking in the background. The school's social worker was also unaware of the situation, likely because the student hadn't been disruptive in class. Moreover, no one had told me that the other student, along with his friends, had been bullying the young artist for an entire year before he decided to stop coming to school. I suspect I wasn't informed of this because none of the teachers knew, as they hadn't bothered to investigate why he spent his breaks alone, sitting by himself with a distant stare. It was only after the other students became comfortable with me that they began to share this kind of information. As a teacher, I've encountered many students throughout my career, but there's one particular student whose haunting memory still lingers. It happened a few years back when I was teaching English at a high school in a small, sleepy town. There was a student named Jacob who, at first glance, seemed like your typical teenager, quiet, kept to himself, and did reasonably well in class. However, as the school year progressed, I began to notice some unsettling patterns in his behavior that I simply couldn't ignore. Jacob would always sit in the back of the classroom, hunched over and doodling in his notebook. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of his drawings, disturbing images of mutilated animals, shadowy figures, and cryptic symbols. At first, I tried to brush it off as teenage angst, or perhaps a fascination with horror, but the growing sense of unease I felt whenever I interacted with him was undeniable. Around the same time, I began to hear whispers among the students of strange occurrences happening around the school. Dead animals would be found near the building, their lifeless bodies carefully arranged in bizarre patterns. Sinister messages were scrawled on the bathroom walls, warning of impending doom. It wasn't long before I connected the dots and realized that Jacob's increasingly erratic behavior coincided with these chilling events. One day after school, I stayed late to grade papers and prepare for the next day's lesson. The sun had long set, and the building was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of the janitor's vacuum cleaner. As I was getting ready to leave, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I peeked out of my classroom to find Jacob wandering the halls, his eyes vacant, and his movements almost mechanical. I asked him if everything was all right, but he simply stared at me with those cold, empty eyes. He didn't say a word and walked away, leaving me feeling even more unnerved than before. Despite my growing concern for Jacob, I hesitated to involve the school administration. After all, I had no concrete evidence that he was responsible for the macabre incidents taking place. However, when I found a note on my desk one morning, hastily written in red ink with a chilling message, "You can't stop what's coming," I knew I had to take action. I reported my suspicions to the administration, who agreed to keep an eye on Jacob, but reiterated that there was little they could do without solid proof. The atmosphere in the school grew increasingly tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all being watched. Even the other students began to avoid Jacob, sensing that something was deeply wrong. Late one evening, as I was once again working in my classroom, I heard a loud crash from the hallway. My heart raced as I cautiously stepped out to investigate, only to find Jacob standing in the shadows, holding a broken glass trophy from one of the display cases. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I could see the darkness that had taken hold of him. He lunged at me with the jagged trophy, but I managed to dodge his attack and lock myself in the classroom. I frantically called the police, my hands shaking as I relayed the situation. They arrived shortly after, apprehending Jacob before he could cause any more harm. In the aftermath of that terrifying night, it was discovered that Jacob had been suffering from severe mental health issues and had become obsessed with dark rituals and the occult. His home life was troubled, with a history of abuse and neglect that had gone unnoticed by those around him. Jacob was eventually placed in a psychiatric facility to receive the help he so desperately needed. That harrowing experience shook me to my core and served as a stark reminder that, as educators, we must always be vigilant and aware of the well-being of our students. We cannot afford to overlook the signs of distress or dismiss them as mere teenage quirks. We have a responsibility to provide a safe and nurturing environment for our students, and that includes recognizing when they are in need of help. As the school community attempted to move forward from the ordeal, we implemented new policies and procedures to better address students' mental health and well-being. Counselors were brought in to provide support, and teachers underwent training to better recognize the signs of emotional distress in their students. We also introduced an anonymous reporting system, allowing students and staff to voice concerns without fear of retribution. Though the memory of Jacob still haunts me, I hope that he has finally found the help and support he needed to overcome the darkness that had consumed him. His story serves as a painful reminder of the importance of empathy and understanding in our roles as educators. It is our duty to not only teach our students but to care for their emotional well-being and guide them through the challenges they may face. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell. Click here for more true scary stories.